Hello everybody, and thank you so much for coming along tonight to Doctors for the Environment's After Hours webinar on Nature, Our Medicine. My name is Kate Wylie. I'm a GP and Chair of Doctors for the Environment, and it's my pleasure to be facilitating this event this evening, where we'll be talking to Dr. Dimity Williams, also a GP, about Nature, Our Medicine. Before that, though, I want to acknowledge country. So the nation we call Australia is stolen land. First Nations people have never ceded their sovereignty of their land, and respect is owed to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island nations and First Nations people. I'm calling today from Tandanya, also known as Adelaide, on Kaurna land. And hello to a group in Ghana is Namani. So Namani to you all, and thank you so much for being here.
Daniel took the iPad charger thing.
I do think that it's a sign of respect if people write the name of the land that they're on in the chat, and then we can get a sense that, you know, we are coming from all across this country tonight. A bit of housekeeping. If you're not speaking, can you please put yourself on mute? We are recording tonight, and this video will end up on DEA's YouTube channel. So if people aren't muted, it creates a buffer and that affects the quality of the recording. So I really do appreciate it if people do mute themselves. Dimity will be presenting first, and she and I will be having a discussion. And then at the end, we'll open up to questions and discussion to the floor. So please, if you have questions as you go, either put them in the chat or write them down, and then we'll get back to them when we finish. Okay, so hello, Dimity. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here this evening and being part of our webinar series. Hope you're well. Hello.
Thank you. Yes, I'm well. Thank you.
If you'd like to start sharing your slides and introduce yourself and tell us a bit about this fabulous book that you have written called Nature, Our Medicine, and I'll just show it to everybody. Please get yourself a copy. I feel like Molly Meldrum. And really fabulous book. Thanks, Dimity.
Thanks, Kate, and thank you for the opportunity to speak about my book, Nature, Our Medicine, How the Natural World Sustains Us. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country that I'm coming to you from, who are the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their care of country and all the land, waters and continuing culture. So yes, there's a picture of my beautiful book, which I'm very excited about. Am my slide screen sharing okay?
Yeah, they're great. No worries at all, Dimity.
Okay, lovely. So just to introduce myself a little bit, as Kate said, I'm a GP. So I've worked in general practice for nearly 30 years now. And I think as GPs, we have a unique perspective on health. So we look after people for a long time, months to years to sometimes decades.
Yeah.
And so sometimes from in utero right through into adulthood. And we also look after multiple members of the same family and sort of understand patients' health within this broader realm of their, family, community, and work life. And I think we're also pretty good at explaining complex scientific information to people. So hopefully that comes through in my book. That's been certainly the intention.
It very much does, Dimity.
Oh, good. I'm also a nature lover, and I think that has come from my childhood, which was very rich with nature. I was fortunate, even though I grew up in the suburbs of Melbourne, that we had, bushland at the end of the street, and my mum loved birds and flowers, and we'd often be outside. And my primary school had bush just over the back fence. So I think that has really underpinned my advocacy and certainly played a role in the choices that I've made regarding the things that I've done. And I've also had this lived experience of the healing power of nature. I think that spending time outside just makes me feel better. And it's been a really important tool that I've used to help me get through difficult times, which I do share in the book as well. And my journey into motherhood, I think, feeds into it too. You can see here at Community Climate Action Group, I was part of early on in my activism. We had Peter Costello as our local MP, so we had someone to talk to. We had lots of colourful actions, and after that I became involved with Doctors for the Environment and also worked with Bob Brown Foundation and about highlighting the threats to the tarkine. But being a mother made me reflect on my own childhood and how not only was there less nature now, but there was less time and space for kids to get outside. And I think this is what we're seeing sort of played out in our healthcare system now, when we're seeing people who are living dramatically different lives to the lives that we all would have lived 30, 40, 50 years ago. So this is a slide of Kids in Nature Network's Nature Play Week, which I just thought I'd mention. So I co-founded the Kids in Nature Network just over 10 years ago, and it's our 10th anniversary of Nature Play Week coming up the first week of April. So it's about really emphasising the importance for children to get outside and play in nature. So that's something I just wanted to briefly mention.
Yeah, it's a very important thing that we're not kind of getting across out there. Thank you for mentioning that.
That's all right. And so here I am with showing off my book and the wonderful Bob Brown, who kindly wrote the foreword for the book. And I think, Kate, you asked me before, what prompted me to write a book. And I think that I felt that I had all this information, decades of going to conferences and reading scientific journals about climate change and health and biodiversity and health. And also my work with the Kids in Nature Network, meeting early childhood educators and others involved in research around children's wellbeing. So I had this information and I wanted to share it. I met with politicians, written submissions, policy statements, all those things. And I thought, well, this is just another way. Maybe I can write a book, and that can be the basis for conversations and perhaps, explain some things to people. I think a lot of people really aren't all that clear on climate change or biodiversity and what these things are and how they might be relevant to their health. So that was the idea.
So sort of another way into that, in trying to kind of get that information out to the world.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, another way. And I think, there's not many books, or I haven't found a book that talks about climate change and health in this way, written from a perspective of a health practitioner. So I feel like it's unique in that way.
And very needed. Sorry,
needed.
Problem of our time.
I think that's right. And the more books on this, the better, I think. So it's just another book to be on that shelf. So the premise of the book is that these lifestyle changes over the last decades have seen us move away from not only one another, but from the natural living world. And we've kind of actually moved into virtual worlds too. And this has not been good for our well-being personally or for the well-being of the planet. So we're seeing climate change and mass extinctions occurring, and we sort of also seem to be so disconnected from it. We almost don't seem to care or notice it. So I feel like part of this, the solution is to reconnect with nature, to get outside, to start to notice it and develop a sense of care for it. So that's the overarching premise of the book. Okay, so I thought we'd just move through the book, and because it is quite wide-ranging, and just dip into a little example or a vignette from each chapter. We'll see how we go with the time. Does that sound all right with you, Kate?
Yeah, of course. Please do.
Yeah. Okay, so the first part of the book is got quite a grand title. It's called The World, and it's about it's sort of setting the scene, about biodiversity, which is the biological richness of life on Earth, and a bit of a scientific exploration of what that is. How all these living things interact with one another within ecosystems and then within larger biomes, and how human health sits within that. I've also talked a bit in this chapter about the big planetary systems that connect up all life. So this being the water cycle and soil. So I thought we might just talk briefly about soil now. So often we don't think about it, and many people think of it as just dirt, something to kind of be thrown away, when it's actually really rich with life. It's a whole living community of organisms. And I like this picture because it shows this network of all these roots and how intricately they impregnate the soil. And it reminds me of the lungs, and how the blood vessels course through the lungs, and then you get this incredible exchange. And there's a similar kind of exchange of nutrients occurring within the root system. And of course, that's how we obtain essential minerals like iron and zinc through this complex interplay of the soil. So we really need to look after soil. And as we know from our climate change work, soil also holds lots of carbon. So really important to leave it where it is.
Which I think that's an underappreciated bit of knowledge there. You know, I don't think I think about that very much, that soil is a carbon store. Yeah, I like that you point that out, Dimity. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then I've sort of explored the relationships within this living matrix and our relationship to it, to this wider web of life. And so this is sort of also looking at the influence of science and colonisation, and how through these processes we've kind of disrupted globally First Nations care of country, and what the implications have been. So it covers lots of different things within this chapter, but I thought we could just speak briefly about the story of rubber, which I guess not everybody might be aware of. So so rubber this is a rubber tree, and it's being tapped for its sap, which is what is turned into rubber in the industrial process. And it was originally just a rainforest tree in the Amazon, and Amazonian tribes would use it. But then, of course, someone discovered it and decided that they would, it was Charles Goodyear in 1939, discovered that it could be industrialised, and then it became much more valuable and sought after. So an English guy called Henry Wickham smuggled some seeds out and took them to Kew, to the Botanic Gardens there. And they were cultivated and then disseminated through the colonies, and started to be grown in Sri Lanka, which was called Ceylon at the time. And so that led to a whole lot of deforestation of rainforest to be replaced by this cash crop. And I just think it serves as an example of the commodification of nature and sort of change it's beginning of the change in that relationship, and what it's meant for biodiversity, and also for the people who are living in contact with those forests.
And it shows that, you know, what we're doing now has actually been happening for a very long time, and is a sort of a continuation of our culture that says that we are allowed to, you know, just take and keep taking from nature rather than living in harmony with it.
That's right. And also moving stuff around, you know, this sort of moving plants around the world sort of as a commodity, and how that plays out. And now I guess we hear a lot about palm oil, and now you'll often see these crops together. You know, there might be rubber plantations and then there'll be palm oil in similar places. Yeah. Sorry, so I need to just how to go to the next slide. That worked for you. Yeah, so the third chapter looks at human health more deeply within Earth's biome, and particularly how our inner gut, or our microbiome, interacts with the wider natural world through the food we eat and the air we breathe. So there's this interplay between the outer natural world and the inner natural world. And I guess we're learning much more about that now, aren't we? And how important our microbiome is for our mental health and our immune system, and all these different sort of parts of our body. And that this is dependent upon this outer world as well. So we are kind of really, really deeply connected and embedded within nature. And so also in this chapter, I talk a little bit about the medicines we get from nature, and about some bush medicine that First Nations people have used and continue to use. And I showed this is a picture because I think we have such a resource and a privilege and opportunity here in Australia to connect with First Nations people and to learn on country from them about all the uses that they have had for plants and animals. And this is just a walk I went on with a group called Living Culture. And it was on Bunurong land, which is now called the Mornington Peninsula. And they take the sap there from the grass tree, which and they heat it up and they use it to heal wounds, a little bit like we use histoacryl or the glue in our emergency department. So, but there is this sense, of course, that there's always a concern about the future and not taking too much and only taking what's needed and taking it at the right time for not only future generations of people, but future generations of other animals that might need that resource. So it's just such a special understanding, I think, and sensibility for us to learn from. Okay. And the next chapter looks a bit further at nature's gifts. Apart from these things like medicines that we get from nature, it inspires creativity and fosters this sense of awe and wonder, which of course is so important for our learning, and inspires design. So a little mention there about biophilic design. Are you familiar with that, Kate?
I think I learned it from you, to be perfectly honest, Dimity. But just that, I think it's a beautiful idea of allowing nature to inform our architecture. And of course, this example that you're about to show us from the Sagrada Familia, Gaudi's design is just so exultant and just walking through a forest of really tall trees. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, so often when we're in these sorts of spaces that have been designed with this biophilic idea in mind, we feel good because it sort of evokes some of this early memory that we had. So yeah, this is the ceiling of the Sagrada Familia, which is a famous church in Barcelona, which was designed by Gaudi, and he was very inspired by nature and used lots of curved forms and tried to avoid straight lines, I think he would say. And so you can see how there are big columns of the church go up to the ceiling, and they're so much like tree trunks, and it looks just like looking up almost into the canopy of a forest. So there's lovely examples to see. And now we see biophilic design informing the design of healthcare centres and apartment buildings and other places where people live, which is so good for us, I think, to be in these places. Okay, so we'll take a deep breath now because we're going into the slightly tricky section. So I thought it was important within the book to include a couple of chapters about the threats we're facing with climate change and other forms of human-induced damage to our planet. And there's this very powerful quote from Greta Thunberg. And I think particularly this week when the Parliament's debating about the safeguard mechanism, and we've just had the latest IPCC report. So in this chapter, I do go into quite a lot of detail about the carbon cycle and climate change and how climate change is a threat to our health, because I think a lot of people I think a lot of people have made the connections, but it's not for everyone. So I really sort of pared it back and tried to make it very clear. But also looked at other forms of pollution, so use of chemicals and use of plastics, things like that, which not only damage nature, but damage ourselves too. So I could have chosen so many slides to highlight this, but I've chosen this one, which is from the 2019-2020 Black Summer fires, because as a Victorian, that was something that very much impacted me, although I'm sure if you're from New South Wales, you might have chosen a flood. And this is just, at 1.1 degree of warming. And in these fires, we lost, 46 million acres, much of the Blue Mountains, over 1 billion animals. I think most people know the statistics. And, for me personally, Kurrajingalong National Park in Victoria, which is a very special place to me, was almost completely burnt. So, of course, this affects our health, these sorts of severe weather events, our physical health and our psychological and emotional health. So, it's obvious, I guess, to us, those of us who work in this space and who've been talking about this and highlighting the connections, but I think, it's helpful to kind of unpack it a little bit further. And so that's what I've done within this chapter.
And I think, Dimity, I just want to comment that I think that is just, it's absolutely vital that you do that. I know that, the book has this concept of, showing us how nature can be, healing to us and how we can also help heal nature. But, we know we're in this really important time in human history. What did the IPC tell us just this week? This decade is the last kind of roll of the dice we have as far as having a livable future. And so, it's important that we have it. And I know lots of us find it's a hard thing to talk about, and it's a hard thing to think about. But, we haven't got time for denial, and we really have to be getting on and doing. And, you tell us this, but then you show us what to do as well. And so by giving people this positive message, I think it's really powerful.
Yeah, well, I think I always come back to a health interaction. And I think, if we have a patient and we diagnose cancer, we don't not talk about the cancer. We tell them about the cancer, we explain what it means, we explain what the treatment is, and then we're there with them as they kind of go on that journey. So I feel like it's similar in this space as well. So explaining it to people, because we need people to understand, and so they can make the changes. But it's obviously not up to people individually only. There's much work is required by government and the systems that are in place. So in the next chapter, I go in to look more at this relationship humans have with the natural world, because how is it that we're in this situation, as you just said, Kate, that we have to act now? It's not like this is new information. So how have we let ourselves get here? So there's in this chapter, I kind of look a little bit about that, and I thought that the example that encapsulates that is the story of Mount Isa. And there's a lead smelter in the centre of the town. And, there have been concerns for a long time about lead poisoning of children. And we're at the stage where it took a long time for an independent study to be done. And, 40% of the children there have concerning levels of lead, which we know is profoundly damaging. So I think that sort of highlights that this predicament, and that this sort of toxicity in our relationship that we need. Like, how is it that we're using the blood level of lead in a child as a marker of the level of environmental pollution in a whole town? It just seems crazy. So so that's sort of one example there, I think. So it's not obviously not just all about climate change, it's just about this overall relationship that we have. Okay, so now we can move on to health. So the second part of the book focuses more on health of people, of our bodies. And as I said in the beginning, it has changed a lot in the last 30 years. Certainly when I started in general practice, I don't think, I can't even really remember having children come in with anxiety or difficulties with significant behavioural problems. But now I see it a lot, and adults too, of course. So there's just been such a dramatic shift. And so we see these a rise in mental health conditions, but also in non-communicable diseases, resulting from this move to inside to sit down. So I think that part of that is really this disconnect, and I think Looney captures it really well in this cartoon. So that even if we're outside now, we're often just we sort of almost don't let ourselves just go for a walk. We go for a walk listening to a podcast, or go for a walk and have a phone call, or go for a walk. It's sort of there's never just this noticing and being outside. We've kind of distracted ourselves too much. So part of the pivot we need to do is to start to pay attention, basically, and that's where these nature-based solutions come into play. So this is, of course, what I like talking about. Let me just find where I'm up to. Yes, here we go. So this chapter talks about all the different solutions, and there's a whole gamut of them. So these range from bringing nature in to healthcare settings with pictures or pot plants, or playing natural sounds to help people feel calmer, through to helping people to get outside more, and to, when they're outside, to pay attention in a different way. So I thought we'd just talk about a couple of those things now. So first one I thought I'd talk about is forest bathing, because it's a little bit topical now. People are starting to hear about it. Is this something you might have come across at all, do you think? Or
I think lots of us have, really.
yeah.
But it's that sense of, I think we need to sort of understand how to do it well, actually, because, often I think a lot of us go and walk in nature, but we end up still being on our phone, or still thinking about the 50,000 things that we need to get done and how I can use my time most productively, and all of that sort of head noise. And
That's right.
this is about getting out of that, isn't it? And into, a stillness, really.
Yeah. And so this is a photo of Qing Li, who's the Japanese scientist and physician who started, I think, back in the 80s to 90s, developing this forest bathing. So it's quite different to sort of power walking through being outside. Forest bathing is really slow, over at least a couple of hours generally, and and then it's just about, so not only being outside for that long period of time, but also really paying attention to what's around you and moving slowly and mindfully, and maybe just sitting down somewhere. And he says it's okay to read a book or have some tea or do some gentle Tai Chi, but he describes, he thinks that probably half of the benefits are from the inhalation of these phytoncides, which are essential oils released by the bark of certain trees, which the trees use as an insecticide, but which seem to be related to the activity of our natural killer cells. So he sort of wants you to go in the forest and take these deep breaths to breathe in the fresh air. So his research initially focused more on cardiovascular outcomes, so lowering heart rate and blood pressure and improving heart rate variability. But, studies since then have led more to use for psychological benefits. So in Japan, forests are accredited for forest bathing, so it's much easier for doctors. I think you can refer someone to a particular forest for a certain amount of time, and there are health workers there to help facilitate the experience. So it's sort of embedded much more within the health system than it is here. Here we have more, just starting, I think, in Australia, but certainly this is something that's done overseas quite a lot, in the UK and America and in Canada. The Canadian Medical Association actually recently released a statement wanting nature prescriptions to be embedded within the medical curriculum and within healthcare widely. So it's something that's definitely really taking off globally. This is just an example of me and how it might look as a nature prescription. So would you like me to go through that at all? Or
I think you should, Dimity, because I think this is very helpful for us, how we can sort of start to say this to our own patients and use it as a modality.
So apart from the cardiovascular benefits of I've talked about it within forest bathing, but we think it's probably to do with generally being out in a beautiful natural environment. We get this calming of our system. So blood pressure it drops, and so do our feelings of stress and anxiety, and mood sort of lifts. So I will mention it to patients. So there's this, we can give you a nature prescription and talk about the benefits, and often they're really interested. And we talk about where, how they think they might fit it into their lives and where they like to go. And then we have best practice software, so I can write it as if it's an exercise prescription, and it actually prints out on prescription paper, and I put the details in. But I always put a little note in there, phone. We talk about having the phone off on do not disturb, and setting it on a timer, so they don't have to look at the phone for the time. So they decide, okay, well, I've got 15 minutes or half an hour, so I'll put my phone on silent and go for a walk, and paying attention to the natural world around them. Some people might just sit outside in their courtyard if they aren't up for going for a walk, or do some gardening. It doesn't have to be going for a walk that's more vigorous, or they could just go and sit in a park for half an hour at lunchtime. So it's sort of a range of approaches, and you don't have to achieve a certain heart rate or anything like that. It's just about relaxing and enjoying and paying attention to the natural world around you.
And I imagine, like different patients would respond differently when you bring this up.
Yeah.
But you must get, and some people would be a little bit resistant, but I'm sure you get a lot of people who, once they have try it, can give you positive feedback about how it went for them.
Yeah, well, I think like anything, it's not going to be for everybody. It's just, but often people want to have a tool and almost want to be given some permission to not be doing something all the time, to understand that actually it's really good for their body and their mind to have this quiet time, and it's has a therapeutic value. So it's okay to not be always doing something. I think in our culture of busyness, patients often seem to like it. There are some who, of course, are not interested, and I wouldn't, if it wasn't, appropriate to the consultation, of course, I wouldn't, like any intervention, we talk about it. But the responses I've had, I've been often pleasantly surprised at how it's received by people. So I'd encourage you to give it a go.
Yeah, and to use non-pharmacological approaches reduces the carbon footprint of our healthcare. So that's also a plus.
Yeah, that's right. So there's so many positives for this kind of an intervention, and it really doesn't take very long, as part of a normal sort of consultation. It's just getting our heads around it. I think we need to change our mindset around it as well and see it as a valid tool. Yeah. Okay. So then I do go into a bit more detail about our mind and how spending time in nature is therapeutic. And I background that by talking about our evolution and that, and how our brain's really used to a much quieter, calmer environment than we're currently living in. So it's not really surprising that so many people feel anxious and distracted. It's not like a weakness within them, it's the environment that we're in. So it's quite a discussion about that. And I think if you just reflect on how you felt when we looked at the photo of the Black Saturday or that Black Summer, and then how you feel when you look at an image like that, it's totally different, isn't it? So there's quite a lot of power in just a beautiful image of nature, which I think is something for us to remember, that in our waiting rooms and consulting rooms, that we can have these beautiful images of nature, or we can have a video running, instead of having the waiting room having a TV which shows the news, which can often be very distressing. It's showing beautiful images of nature. Or could we have some nature sounds in the waiting room? There are all these different ways. So instead of people feeling overloaded and stressed when they come in and having us sort of layer on top of that, we're kind of providing this therapeutic space for them. So yeah, something to think about with that too. And this is a little bit more personal, this chapter. It's about, using I call it a green mind approach, which is this sort of spending time mindfully in nature. And I talk a little bit about how I've used both the practicing mindfulness and nature together to help me kind of get through difficult times. And how I embed it in my day. And so here's a photo of me with my trees that I like to spend some time with every morning. But, depends on how busy I am, 15 minutes, half an hour of just, gentle stretching or just sitting and practicing mindfulness for a while. And certainly was really helpful strategy for me when it came to working as a GP through COVID in Melbourne. There was a time there where we didn't have PPE in general practice. We were going to work and it was quite frightening, as worrying whether we were going to get really, really sick or not. And so this is a steadying practice for me. So something to hopefully inspire others to think about too. But I do talk a bit about there are other therapeutic approaches, so more so you can have nature-based counselling, where you, instead of sitting and talking to a psychologist, in a consulting room. You go and you do it walking somewhere or kayaking or bush adventure therapy, which is often really great for young people. So there's all these different nature-based approaches that that I kind of chat through in that chapter. And then, of course, I've included a chapter on our children. And that's really, of course, informed by my work with the Kids in Nature Network and as a family doctor. And this lovely quote from Rachel Carson, who I guess you know is probably the founder of the modern environmental movement. And she, alongside her advocacy on chemical use with her book Silent Spring, she would take her young grandnephew out into this her property that she lived in, and together they would explore. So she didn't have children of her own, but she was a real nature mentor for her grandson. So this chapter is about, you know, all the different facets of nature for children. So nature play and how important that is for children to have the time and space to be in nature, but also how we can enrich our kids' school grounds and with lots of trees and plants, and how that has positive effects on their attention and their learning. So yeah, quite some there's a beautiful picture of one of my sons playing in nature. And there's actually the one study that I'll just briefly mention by a researcher called Kate Wylie. She went into a whole lot of different primary schools and measured the amount of vegetation in them, so the number of trees and plants, and sort of came up with a volume. And then she measured what's called the restorative, perceived restorativeness, so how they felt when they came back in, whether they felt calmer and whether they felt they could concentrate better. And the more nature rich the school ground, the better the children felt when they came back. So there's some evidence around that. And we know, of course, it improves air quality in a playground. It provides shade when we're thinking about the future with more heat. So lots of positives for lots of positive health reasons for putting more nature around schools. And then the final chapter is about how we can sort of bring it all together. And as you said earlier, Kate, how we can, through our connecting with nature, develop this sense of care of nature, we can start to kind of heal the planet. And at the same time, our health gets better because there are these co-benefits, right? So if we spend time outside with others, kind of repairing our environment, we help the environment, we're addressing climate change, improving biodiversity, and we're also improving our own physical and mental health. It's kind of a no-brainer.
It is a no-brainer, except how do we get people to see it? It's just incredible that we don't. But, this is, I suppose, the beauty of your book is that you're getting us to try and make these connections.
That's the idea, yes. So this is my final slide, really. And I guess it's about trying to reimagine the future, and to imagine a future where, healthcare settings are naturally healthy places to be, lots of fresh air, lots of plants, images and sounds of nature, where landscape-based health interventions are embedded into our healthcare system. We have forest bathing programs which see old growth forests protected for their health-giving values. And, we start looking and loving and being in nature in a different way. So I think it's certainly possible, but it requires this radical transformation and shift in how we live. And so we can be inspired by, and I do talk about this quite a bit in the book, First Nations philosophies about this care of country. And it's quite a different mindset to the extractive model that we've unfortunately have been left with.
By loving it, we protect what we love. And that's so exactly to encourage us to love our natural world means, we'll want to look after it and make sure it's healthy.
Yeah, so it's really it's a call to people's hearts, isn't it? As much as their minds. I think it's a call to their hearts. Yeah, so that's my little survey through my book.
Thank you so much, Dimity. you start off, you're right at the beginning, you've got that page that says the world, so you set your standard, like set a high bar for us. But then you give us so much in the book about helping us to understand history and why we are the way we are, how our natural world works, the problems that we're facing, but then by offering us solutions at the end, and I think everybody here could resonate with some of what at least something that you said to us tonight about how we can take this into our own worlds, personally, into our practice as practitioners. It's a really powerful thing. So thank you so much, Dimity. I really do appreciate you coming along tonight and talking to us.